The air was thick with smoke and dust. Pieces of broken buildings lay scattered like bones across the dead city. The sun was hidden behind dark clouds, and everything smelled of fire and metal. Marcus moved slowly, his boots crunching on shattered glass. He had been walking for hours, searching the ruins for anything useful: tools, food, spare parts. The war had left this alien world silent, except for the wind that whistled through the empty streets. He stepped over a collapsed wall and looked around. There was nothing but rubble and twisted steel. Marcus sighed and reached for his scanner. He needed something valuable before nightfall, but then he froze. Somewhere nearby, faint and weak, a voice called out. It was small, trembling, and almost lost in the wind. "Please, save me. And my mother, human." Marcus blinked, not sure if he imagined it. The words were soft, but the sound was real. It came again, this time a little louder. "Please, help us." He turned his head, scanning the shadows between broken walls. His heart began to beat faster. Voices like that did not belong in this dead place. He followed the sound, climbing over piles of debris. Each step sent dust into the air. The voice led him to what was once a small marketplace. Now it was only a mess of burnt stalls and fallen beams. Under a collapsed roof, he saw movement. Something small, crouched low, with bright eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. It was a child alien, thin and covered in dirt. Her skin was pale blue, her clothes torn and stained with ash. She looked no older than 8. When she saw Marcus, she flinched back. Her hands shook, but she did not run. "Please," she whispered again, pointing deeper into the ruins. My mother." Marcus stepped closer, speaking softly. "Where is she?" The girl didn't answer. She just turned and crawled under a pile of broken wood and stone. Marcus followed, moving carefully. Afraid the rubble might collapse, the smell of smoke grew stronger. The girl stopped beside a large beam. Beneath it, half buried, lay another figure. The woman was still, her face pale under the dust. Her breathing was slow and weak. Her legs were pinned under the beam, and one arm was bent at a strange angle. Marcus knelt beside her, checking her pulse. She was alive, but barely. The girl looked at Marcus with wide, desperate eyes. "Please save her," she said, her voice breaking. "She can't move." Marcus knew he couldn't lift the beam with his bare hands. It was too heavy. He could use his powered exosuit, but that would mean turning it on, and the noise might bring trouble. Enemy patrols still searched these ruins, and they weren't friendly to humans. He looked at the child, then at the mother. If he left them, they would die before morning. If he stayed, he might die trying to save them. His fingers tightened on the strap of his pack. The choice felt heavy, but not for long. He reached for his exosuit controls. The suit powered on with a low hum, lights flickering across its metal frame. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped over the rubble. With a sharp pull, he grabbed the beam. The servos in the suit wind. The beam shifted slowly, dust raining down like ash. The mother's body slid free. Marcus dropped the beam to the side and checked her again. Her breathing was a little stronger now, but she was unconscious. The girl threw her arms around her mother, holding her tightly. Marcus looked toward the street. Somewhere far away, he thought he heard a faint metallic clank. It could be falling debris, or it could be boots. He didn't have much time to find out. "Come on," he said. Lifting the woman into his arms, the girl ran beside him, her small feet moving quickly over the rubble. They would need to get far away before whoever was out there found them. The ruins suddenly felt even more dangerous. Marcus didn't know who these two were or why they were here, but he knew one thing. He was not leaving them behind. Marcus could feel the weight of the alien woman in his arms. even with the help of his exosuit. Carrying her over uneven rubble was slow and dangerous. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. The child stayed close to his side, glancing around nervously. Her glowing eyes darted to every shadow as if expecting danger to jump out at any second. They moved carefully. Through the broken streets, the air was still heavy with dust, and the faint sound of metal shifting in the wind echoed between ruined walls. Marcus wanted to get them to safety quickly, but he knew rushing could make noise, and noise was death out here, finally. They reached a small, sheltered corner where an old wall still stood upright. Marcus lowered the woman onto a patch of ground that was mostly clear of debris. The child knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her mother's face with trembling hands. Marcus checked her injuries. Her leg was twisted at an odd angle, likely broken. One side of her ribs was bruised badly, and there were shallow cuts across her arms and neck. She was dehydrated too, her lips cracked and pale. The child looked up at him, fear in her voice. She will be okay. Marcus hesitated. She's hurt badly, he said gently, but she's alive. The girl nodded slowly. Clutching her mother's hand, Marcus reached into his pack and pulled out a small water container. He poured a little into the woman's mouth, making sure she didn't choke. Her lips moved slightly, and a soft sound escaped, a word in a language Marcus didn't know. The child replied in the same tongue, her voice soft and urgent. Suddenly, the woman's eyes opened halfway. They were a deep shade of silver, reflecting the dim light. She looked at Marcus for a long second, confusion and fear in her gaze. Her fingers weakly gripped his arm. "It's all right," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt you." But she didn't seem to understand. Her eyes flicked to the child, then back to him. The girl leaned close to her mother's ear, whispering something that made the woman's grip loosen. Marcus knew they couldn't stay here. Enemy patrols might already be tracking the noise from his exosuit when he lifted the beam. He scanned the street ahead. It was narrow. With more debris to climb, carrying her would be slow, and the risk of being spotted was high. The child tugged at his arm. "This way," she whispered, pointing toward an alley. Marcus followed her lead, adjusting the woman in his arms. The alley was dark and smelled of damp stone. It led to what looked like an entrance to an underground area, half blocked by fallen bricks. He set the woman down briefly and began clearing the entrance. Each brick scraped and crumbled in his hands. Every noise felt too loud, echoing off the narrow walls. Then a sound from far behind them. Boots. Heavy and deliberate, crunching on rubble. Marcus froze, listening. The girl's eyes widened. "They are coming," she whispered, fear shaking her voice. Marcus moved faster, shoving aside the last bricks and creating enough space to pass through. He picked up the woman again, ducked into the opening, and helped. The girl followed. The tunnel inside was cold and dark. It sloped downward, away from the ruined streets. They walked quickly, the sound of the boots growing fainter. Still, Marcus kept looking over his shoulder. He had been in enough war zones to know that danger often followed in silence. After a few minutes, they reached a wider space underground. Old support beams held up the ceiling, and water dripped slowly from cracks above. Marcus laid the woman down against one of the walls. She was breathing a little easier now. Though her face was still pale, the girl sat close to her. Holding her mother's hand tight, Marcus took the moment to catch his breath. He was covered in dust, sweat rolling down his neck. He glanced at the pendant hanging around the child's neck, a small, carved piece of crystal, shaped like a teardrop. It seemed delicate and out of place in this world of rubble. "Who are you two?" "Ah," Marcus asked softly. The girl hesitated, looking down at the pendant. We were hiding when the building fell," she said, her voice shaking. "My mother, she is important. To my people, Marcus frowned. Important often meant dangerous to help. But he had already carried them this far, and there was no turning. Back now, in the distance, a faint vibration ran through the ground. Marcus's instincts told him the enemy wasn't far. He tightened the straps on his pack and prepared to move again. If they stayed underground too long, the tunnels could become a trap. But if they went back to the surface, they could be caught. Either way, Marcus knew one thing he had taken. Responsibility for them now, and he wasn't going to let them die. The underground air was damp and cold. Water dripped from cracks above, making small ripples in the puddles on the floor. Marcus moved quietly, adjusting his grip on the alien woman in his arms. Her weight was starting to slow him down, but he didn't complain. The little girl walked right behind him. Her small footsteps, quick but careful. Every now and then she would glance over her shoulder, as if expecting something to appear from the darkness. They had been walking through the tunnels for several minutes when Marcus heard it. A faint metallic click, far behind them. It was the sound of a boot stepping on loose metal. He slowed down, raising one hand for the girl to stop. The woman, in his arms, let out a soft groan, but Marcus kept his focus on the shadows. The sound came again, closer this time. His gut tightened. He knew that sound. It was the slow, steady approach of someone who didn't want to be heard but wasn't rushing. Hunters moved like that. Marcus lowered the woman carefully against the wall. He gestured for the girl to stay. Silent, reaching into his belt, he pulled out a small compact rifle. The weapon hummed softly as it powered up. He crouched low, peering into the tunnel behind them. The light here was dim, but enough to catch movement. A shadow flickered across the wall, tall, thin, and moving with purpose. Marcus's finger hovered near the trigger. The shadow paused, then slipped back into darkness. The girl leaned close to him, whispering so softly he almost didn't hear. "They followed us. They want my mother." Marcus glanced at her. "How many?" Her eyes darted toward the tunnel. 3, maybe 4. That wasn't good. 3 or 4 enemies in close quarters would be difficult, especially while protecting 2 people who couldn't fight. Marcus made a decision. They couldn't keep walking straight ahead. The hunters would eventually catch up. They needed to disappear. He remembered the layout of these tunnels from his scavenging runs. Not far ahead, there was a side path that led into the old storage chambers. They were dangerous, unstable floors and collapsed sections, but also easy to hide in. Marcus helped the girl lift her mother again. The woman winced, but didn't cry out. They moved quickly, but quietly, their footsteps barely touching the ground. The sound of the hunters grew softer, then louder again. They were tracking them like predators. The tunnel widened into a large, round chamber. Broken crates and rusted machinery were scattered across the floor. Marcus led them to the far corner, where a pile of debris hid a narrow gap. He pushed through first, then helped the girl and her mother crawl inside. Inside was a small, hollow space, just big enough for them to sit. Marcus crouched by the gap, his rifle ready. The hunters entered the chamber moments later. Their armor was dark and sleek, their helmets reflecting the faint light. They moved in silence, scanning the room with small, glowing visors. One of them stopped near the center. Kneeling to the ground, he touched the dirt and rubble, then turned his head toward Marcus's hiding place. Marcus's pulse quickened. If they searched too carefully, they'd find them in seconds. The hunter stood slowly, making a hand signal to the others. They began moving toward the far side of the chamber instead. Marcus didn't breathe until their footsteps faded into another tunnel. The girl's small hand gripped his arm. "They will come back," she whispered. Marcus nodded. He knew she was right. They stayed hidden for several more minutes before Marcus decided to move again. The longer they stayed in one place, the greater the chance of being trapped. He helped the mother to her feet as best as he could, then guided them toward another narrow passage on the side. This one sloped downward, leading to deeper tunnels that even hunters avoided. The air grew colder. Marcus's breath came out in faint clouds. Every sound felt louder down here, their steps, the drip of water, even the quiet hum of his exosuit. Halfway down the passage, Marcus stopped. There was light ahead, flickering against the tunnel walls, not the steady glow of hunter lamps. This light was warmer. Like fire, Marcus crept forward, leaving the girl and her mother behind. For a moment at the end of the tunnel, he saw an old maintenance room. A small fire burned in a metal container, and beside it sat an old alien scavenger. Wrapped in rags, the scavenger's eyes met Marcus's. "You are not safe here, human?" The old alien rasped. "They hunt you already." Marcus glanced back toward the shadows they had come from. He could still feel the hunter's presence. The old alien pointed to a hatch on the floor. "Go down," he said. "It will take you to the old river tunnels." They will not follow there. Marcus didn't know if he could trust him, but the hunters were getting closer. He motioned for the girl and her mother to come. The child helped guide her injured mother to the hatch. Marcus opened it, revealing a dark shaft leading downward. He took one last look at the flickering fire. Then, without another word, he helped them climb down into the blackness below. The air inside the shaft was cold and damp. Marcus went first, climbing carefully down the narrow ladder. The metal rungs were slippery with moisture, and every creak echoed in the hollow space. Below, darkness swallowed everything. Only the faint glow from his helmet lamp cut through the black. The little girl came next, her small hands gripping the ladder tightly. She glanced up often to check that her mother was being lowered safely. Marcus helped guide the injured woman down, supporting her weight as much as he could. It took several minutes, but finally, all three reached the bottom. The floor was made of slick stone. Water trickled along the sides, running toward a larger flow somewhere ahead. The sound of rushing water filled the tunnel. It was deep and constant. Marcus knew this had to be the old river tunnels the scavengers spoke about. He adjusted his grip on the woman, lifting her again. The girl stayed close, her pendant glinting faintly in the light. They moved forward, boots splashing softly in the shallow water. The tunnel ceiling arched high above them, covered in moss and dripping vines. It felt ancient, forgotten by everyone except creatures that lived in the dark. After a few minutes, the girl whispered, "Will they come here?" Marcus shook his head. "Not if we keep moving." But even as he said it, his instincts stayed sharp. He knew hunters sometimes broke their own rules when the reward was high enough. The deeper they went, the louder the river's roar became. The tunnel widened until they were walking beside a rushing underground current. The water was fast, churning over jagged rocks. Marcus made sure to stay between the girl and the river's edge. A single wrong step could pull her under in seconds. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed behind them. It wasn't the river. It was a low, metallic hum. Marcus froze, listening. It grew louder. The girl's eyes widened. "They found us," she whispered. Marcus's jaw tightened. He quickened his pace, his boots splashing harder in the water. The tunnel split ahead. One path curved left and sloped upward. The other followed the river deeper underground. He hesitated for only a moment before choosing the river path. It would be harder for anyone to track them in the noise and spray. They moved quickly, the air growing colder the further they went. Water mist clung to Marcus's face and armor. The woman in his arms stirred weakly, opening her silver eyes for a brief moment. Her gaze locked on his, and she whispered something in her language before slipping back into unconsciousness. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Gratitude mixed with fear. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to walk in single file. Marcus led the way, the girl right behind him, keeping one hand on his armor so she wouldn't lose him. The water was deeper here, reaching up to their knees. The sound of the river drowned out almost everything. Almost, somewhere above, Marcus caught the faintest echo boots again. They were still being hunted. He spotted a ledge on the side of the tunnel, barely wide enough for two people to lie flat. Without a word, he lifted the girl onto it. Then the woman. Marcus climbed up last, pulling his rifle close. They lay still, their bodies pressed into the cold stone. Moments later, shadows moved in the mist. 3 hunters appeared below, their visors glowing faintly in the darkness. They scanned the water. Moving slowly against the current, one of them stopped, kneeling to examine the flow. The others stood perfectly still. Listening, Marcus didn't breathe. The girl's small fingers clutched his sleeve. The hunters remained for several tense seconds before continuing down the tunnel. Their footsteps faded, swallowed by the roar of the river. Marcus waited a full minute before moving again. They climbed down carefully and continued along the river. The cold was starting to bite. Marcus's muscles ached from carrying the woman for so long. But he didn't slow down. Eventually, the tunnel sloped upward, and the roar of the river softened. Ahead was a faint light. It wasn't firelight, it was daylight. Marcus pushed forward, emerging into a hidden canyon carved deep into the earth. Green moss covered the walls, and a small waterfall spilled into a pool. The air here was fresh, and for the first time since they met, the girl smiled faintly. Marcus set the woman down gently near the water. She was breathing better now, her chest rising steadily. The girl knelt beside her, speaking softly in her language. Marcus scanned the canyon walls. There was only one entrance from the tunnels, easy to defend if the hunters found them, but he knew they couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later, they would have to face what was coming, and Marcus had the uneasy feeling that the true danger was not just the hunters. It was whatever secret this woman carried, and why so many were willing to kill to get to her. The hidden canyon was calm, but Marcus didn't relax. He stood near the tunnel entrance, scanning the shadows while the little girl tended to her mother. The sound of the waterfall masked smaller noises, but Marcus kept his ears sharp. Too many times in his life, peace had been a trap, and now, with hunters still somewhere behind them, he couldn't let his guard down. The alien woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open for the first time since he found her. She looked directly at Marcus without fear. Her silver gaze was tired but focused. She spoke softly in her language, her voice carrying both gratitude and pain. The little girl leaned closer to translate. She says, "You saved her life." Marcus gave a short nod. Anyone would have done the same, he said, but the girl shook her head. No. Others would leave. Many already did. The woman's hand moved weakly toward him, her fingers curled around his wrist, light but steady. She whispered again, and the girl translated, "She says she owes you a debt." A life debt. Marcus didn't answer right away. He had heard of life debts before. In some cultures, it was more than gratitude. It was a binding promise, a sacred vow, the kind of thing that could change lives for better or worse. The woman's eyes softened, but she still held on to his wrist. Her voice lowered, speaking only to her daughter now. The girl listened, then turned back to Marcus. She says, "You carry her honor now, and her enemies will know your face." Marcus glanced toward the canyon walls. That didn't sound like a good thing. If her enemies knew who she was and now connected him to her, it meant they wouldn't stop hunting him either. He sat down on a nearby rock, rubbing his temples. He had only come here to salvage supplies. Now he was tangled in a fight that wasn't his. The girl reached for the pendant around her neck. She held it out to Marcus, her small fingers shaking slightly. "This is for you," she said. Marcus frowned. "I can't take that. It's important to you." She looked straight into his eyes. "It means you are with us now. And we are with you." Marcus hesitated, but finally took the pendant. It was cool in his hand. Carved from crystal in the shape of a teardrop, strange markings ran along its surface. Catching the light in shifting patterns, it felt heavier than. It looked as if it carried more than just its weight. The woman watched as he placed the pendant into his pack. Her lips curved into the faintest smile before she closed her eyes again. Resting, Marcus stayed near them, scanning the canyon walls. The water was clear and drinkable, so he filled his flask. He also found a few edible plants growing near the rocks, enough to make a small meal. The girl ate quickly, her hunger clear. But she saved half for her mother. Marcus respected that. Even in hardship, she thought of someone else first. Hours passed, and the sun shifted above the canyon, casting longer shadows. Marcus knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The hunters could find the tunnel entrance at any time. And once they did, this place would turn into a trap. He approached the girl. "We'll need to move when your mother is strong enough," he said. The girl nodded but looked uncertain. She has a place," she said softly, "far from here, safe." "But hard to reach?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of place?" The girl glanced at her mother before answering. "It is a home of the old blood. Only her people know the path." Marcus didn't fully understand. But he knew one thing: if it was far and hard to reach, it might also be safe. Still, the journey there would be dangerous, especially with the hunters chasing them. Just as he was about to speak again, he heard it, a faint thud, like a boot hitting stone. Then another. The sound was coming from the tunnel. Marcus's instincts kicked in instantly. He motioned for the girl to stay low and drew his rifle. The sound grew louder, slow and deliberate steps. The hunters had found the entrance. The girl's eyes widened. "They will kill her," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus looked at the unconscious woman, then at the narrow exit beyond the waterfall. They could try to escape through there, but it would mean crossing open ground. Or they could stand and fight. Marcus tightened his grip on the rifle. He had already carried them this far. He wasn't about to hand them over now. The woman stirred again, her voice weak but urgent. She said something to her daughter, who turned to Marcus with wide eyes. She says, "If you fight for us now, she will call you family." Marcus let out a slow breath. Family. It had been a long time since he had won. Maybe it was time to start again, even if it began in the shadow of war. The footsteps in the tunnel grew louder. Marcus could tell there were at least 3 of them, maybe more. Each step was slow, deliberate, and far too confident. The hunters knew their prey was cornered. The little girl clutched her mother's hand, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus moved to the tunnel entrance, pressing his back against the wall. Rifle ready, a faint red glow began to shine from deep inside the tunnel. It was the visor light from one of their helmets. They were close. Now, Marcus's pulse quickened. But his hands stayed steady. He had been in worse situations, but never with a child and an injured woman behind him. This time, losing wasn't an option. The first hunter stepped into view, tall, armored, with a sleek black mask covering his face. His weapon was raised, scanning the canyon for movement. Marcus waited, timing his breath, when the hunter took another step forward. Marcus fired. The shot hit the side of the helmet, sending sparks into the air. The hunter staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he barked something in his language, and the others surged forward. Marcus ducked back as a barrage of energy bolts blasted the stone wall beside him. Fragments of rock sprayed across his armor. He returned fire, forcing them to scatter. But now they knew exactly where he was. The little girl crouched low, shielding her mother. Her voice trembled as she called out, "They want the pendant. They will not stop until they have it." Marcus's hand brushed against his pack, where the pendant was hidden. So that's what this was really about. Not just revenge, but something valuable, something worth killing for. The hunters pressed. Forward again, Marcus switched his rifle to burst fire. The recoil sharp against his shoulder. One of the hunters fell, crashing into the shallow water at the tunnel mouth. The other two kept advancing, their movements fast and precise. Marcus knew he couldn't hold them here forever. They would eventually flank him. He looked toward the waterfall exit, their only chance. But crossing open ground with the woman and girl would be risky. The alien woman's eyes opened suddenly. Silver and sharp, despite her injuries, she spoke a single word to her daughter, who turned to Marcus. She says, "Go. She will slow them." Marcus shook his head. "She can't even walk," he said. But the woman's gaze didn't waver. She reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out a small, round device. It glowed faintly blue, humming with energy. The girl gasped. "No, Mama, you can't." Marcus didn't know exactly what it was, but he could guess a charge, a distraction, maybe even a weapon. The woman pressed it into Marcus's hand. Her voice was firm, though weak. "She says, use it to make a path," the girl translated. The hunters were closing in fast. Marcus gritted his teeth, armed the device, and tossed it toward the tunnel. A blinding flash erupted, filling the air with white light and a deafening roar. The ground shook as stone cracked and dust billowed out. "Now? Marcus shouted, grabbing the woman and motioning for the girl to run ahead. They sprinted toward the waterfall, water splashing under their boots, the sunlight beyond the falling. Water was blinding after the darkness of the canyon. Marcus pushed through first, the cold spray hitting his armor like ice. The girl followed, then the woman in his arms. On the other side was a steep slope covered in moss and rock. Marcus began climbing, boots slipping but finding their grip. Behind them, the hunters emerged through the water, firing wildly. Bolts of energy scorched the moss near Marcus's feet. He kept moving, using his body as a shield for the woman. The girl scrambled ahead, her small hands gripping every rock she could reach. One hunter tried to follow, but the slope was slick and unstable. A loose rock tumbled down, striking his helmet and sending him crashing back into the pool below. They reached the top of the slope, panting. Ahead was a dense stretch of alien forest, thick with twisted trees and glowing plants. Marcus led them into the cover of the foliage. The sounds of the hunters fading behind. Only when they were deep in the forest did he finally stop. The woman was breathing heavily, but alive. The girl collapsed beside her, tears in her glowing eyes. Marcus scanned the forest, his rifle still in hand. They had escaped for now, but the price was clear. The hunters wouldn't give up, and Marcus now carried not just a pendant, but the lives of two people who had nowhere else to turn. The woman spoke softly, her gaze fixed on him. The girl translated, "She says, you are marked now, up it. You are also part of us." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't know where this road would lead, but he knew one thing. He would see it through, whatever it cost him. The forest was quiet now, but Marcus knew the silence wouldn't last. He kept one hand on his rifle and the other steadying the alien woman. Every step took them deeper into the twisting paths between glowing plants and shadowed trees. The air here was heavy with the scent of wet earth and strange flowers. A faint mist hung low, curling around their legs as they walked. The little girl stayed close, her eyes scanning the darkness. Every crack of a branch made her flinch, but she didn't complain. She carried herself like someone who had already seen too much for her age. Marcus admired her quiet strength, even as he worried for her safety. Hours passed before they stopped to rest in a small hollow sheltered by roots. The woman lay back against a thick trunk, her breathing slow but steady. Marcus gave her some water and a strip of dried rations from his pack. She ate little, but her eyes never left him. It wasn't suspicion anymore, it was something else. A kind of quiet trust, as if she had decided something about him that she hadn't said out loud. The girl sat beside him, fiddling with her pendant. She glanced up at him and asked softly, "Why did you help us, human?" Marcus shrugged. "You called for help. And no one else was there." She tilted her head, but it was dangerous. "You could have left." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "Leaving you there would have been worse than dying," he said, his voice low. The girl's eyes shone, and she leaned against his arm without another word. Night came quickly in the forest, the glowing plants casting eerie light over their small camp. Marcus stayed awake, listening to the sounds of distant creatures. Every now and then, he thought he heard movement far behind them. The hunters might still be tracking, but if they were keeping their distance before dawn. The woman stirred. She sat up slowly, wincing from her injuries, and spoke in her language. The girl translated. "She says, there is a safe place close now. A home of her people." Marcus nodded, helping her to her feet. They set out again, moving through the forest until the trees began to thin. Ahead, Marcus saw something that made him stop, a massive stone wall covered in moss and vines. It rose high above them, disappearing into the mist. The girl stepped forward and pressed her hand against a carved symbol on the wall. The stone shuddered, and with a deep rumble, part of it slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. Marcus's grip on his rifle tightened as they entered. The air inside was warmer. Lit by soft golden lights along the walls, they emerged into a hidden valley. Homes of smooth stone and glass were built into the cliffs, connected by bridges and winding paths. The air was filled with the scent of fresh water and flowering trees. It felt untouched by war, like a place time had forgotten. Several figures approached, their clothes flowing and their expressions cautious. They looked from Marcus to the woman and child. When they saw the woman's face, they bowed deeply. Marcus realized then just how important she truly was. One of them stepped forward. Speaking quickly in their language, the woman replied, her voice firm. The girl turned to Marcus. She tells them, "You saved her life, and mine. You are family now." Marcus felt the weight of those words. Family, he had not heard that word directed at him in years. The figures stepped aside, motioning for them to enter deeper into the valley. Some watched him with curiosity, others with respect. They were led to a large home carved into the cliffside. Inside, the woman was given medical care by skilled hands. Marcus stood nearby, unsure if he should stay. But every time he took a step toward the door, the girl caught his hand, refusing to let go. When the healers finished, the woman called to him. Her voice was stronger now, and though he still needed the girl to translate, the meaning was clear. She says, "Your debt is paid, but her promise remains. Wherever you go, you will never be alone." Marcus nodded. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. The galaxy was still dangerous, and there were things he needed to do. But he also knew he had found something here worth protecting. Not because of any vow or debt, but because it felt right. The next morning, as the sun lit the hidden valley, Marcus prepared to leave. The girl hugged him tightly, slipping the pendant back into his hand. "You keep it," she said. "So you will always find your way back." Marcus smiled faintly and tucked it into his armor. He looked once more at the woman, who gave him a silent nod of respect. Then he turned toward the path leading out of the valley. The war-torn ruins were far behind him now, but he carried their memory and their bond with him from the rubble of destruction. Something rare had been forged, not just survival, but trust, not just allies, but family. And Marcus knew that whatever battles lay ahead, he would never again fight them alone.